I'll take it.
Okay, do y'all see a little notice on your screens now that says recording?
Yes.
Yes.
See, we did it. Thank you, Patricia, and everyone else who was thinking about it. That's perfect. Now, those folks that are missing, they'll have the ability to take a look and see what they missed and catch up. And this is great. And for anyone who has to leave early, you can do the same thing, catch the end of it. So I'll get that posted as soon as I can, probably tomorrow morning. Get it posted and send you the link. All right. You know, I was thinking about shadow and light, and I always like to try to come up with an analogy that captures this. Because I think one of the most difficult things for me to get my head around is that the shadow isn't just negative. The shadow isn't dark stuff. The shadow is whatever we push down out of sight. And so I think last week I was using the far side of the moon, not the dark side of the moon. There is no dark side of the moon, but there is a far side of the moon. There's a side of the moon that we can never see from Earth, but it gets sunlight, you know, in a regular, you know, cyclical basis, just like the Earth does. And so that was one way of looking at it. And then I was thinking, you know, when you make your resume, if you're going for a job, if you were to do a full CV, you know, like the whole curriculum vitae that I guess lawyers and doctors do, it can be, you know, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 pages long to get all that stuff in that you did. And, you know, maybe someone actually cares about all that stuff. But when you're doing a normal resume, then you're going to take that and you're just going to pull those bits that are most relevant to the job that you're seeking. What is going to make you most marketable to them, most attractive to them. You know, and you're going to pick and choose the things that you put in. You know, when I was doing resumes as a younger person, I had dates attached to all my jobs in the span that I was there. And when you get older, you take the dates off, right? It's kind of like that, you know? And when you're going for a different job, you'll take certain things off because they're not relevant to this particular employer and so on and so forth. So you're constantly moving and shifting. It's all the same pool of your stuff. It's all of who you are. But you're only going to present certain things to the person to put you in the best light. And that's really, I think, what we're doing here with the shadow. And the last bits that Frank read last week about the different cultures and how in one culture the shadow is this, and in the other culture that is same thing is light. And trying to go back and forth between cultures is a real crapshoot. And now that we have a global village, and all these things are banging up against each other, it can really be a culture clash. But the point that I guess I'm making is that the stuff that you have on your resume is all stuff that's good about you, but you're going to present it or not based on who you're presenting to. And so the culture and the home in which we grow up is presenting what it is that we need to show and what we need to repress. And that's what ends up in the shadow. So it's all arbitrary. It's so arbitrary. It depends on where and when you were born, what kind of family you grew up in, what culture you were born by accident into are the things that will end up either in the shadow or in the light. But the point of all this is that it is all us, and it all does need to be recognized, acknowledged, and played out in some way. Otherwise, we get really sick. And so with that, if that helps at all, kind of helps me a little bit to continue to get my arms around this. It's kind of a moving target as we go, I think. I don't know if you're experiencing that as well, that this doesn't come all at once. It kind of comes gradually in layers as we spend more time with it. Okay, so we're on page 7. Are there any points or questions or anything anyone would like to discuss before we let Frank dive in? Okay, I think I honored the silence long enough. Let's go and hear Frank's mellifluous voice. How about that for a word? Yeah, so let's go ahead and start, Frank. Page 7. It is also astonishing, that second to the last paragraph.
It is also astonishing to find that some very good characteristics turn up in the shadow. Generally, the ordinary mundane characteristics are the norm, Anything less than this goes into the shadow. But anything better also goes into the shadow. Some of the pure gold of our personality is relegated to the shadow because it can find no place in that great leveling process that is culture.
Okay, so what he's saying there, here's another way of looking at it. Think of the typical bell curve, right? The bell curve. So you got the little skinny spots at the right and the left that are the outliers, and then most of it's all right in the middle. You know, typical distribution, statistical distribution curve. Basically, that's what he's saying. He's saying most of the stuff that's going to end up in the light is going to be in the middle of that bell curve. That's the norm. The norm is what is right down the middle. The norm is what is most common to the most people, which is going to make it kind of most of the vanilla stuff, right? Because the really interesting stuff is going to be at the outliers, the stuff that's more extreme, the stuff that's more uniquely you, and that's going to be positive and negative traits. But those are going to be the things that are going to be put into the shadow as we all are trying to be shaped into the norm of that bell curve in terms of what society needs and expects in order to have a smooth running community and so on and so forth. But I was talking to someone and he's trying to really make big changes in his life, okay? He is changing his diet because he had some health problems. And so he's changing his diet. He's trying to eat really healthy. He has cut out all drugs that he used to do more prolifically. And he's taken those out of his life. He's stopped smoking, just smoking nicotine. And he's starting to work some contemplative spiritual formation. So he's really going through, you know, pretty much all the aspects of his life and trying to make some fundamental changes as he's going forward. And the interesting thing is it's creating real division between him and his family members, closest friends, and his girlfriend. And the feedback that he's getting is that he's on his high horse, he's getting self-righteous, and he thinks he's better than everybody else. And I just thought, I found that fascinating. And I asked him, well, do you think you're better than everyone else? How is it that you're communicating to these people? You know, and, you know, maybe at times he was getting a little judgy. It's possible, but isn't it interesting, the pushback that you get as you're trying to change the shape of that bell curve in your own life? You know, what did Jesus say? Jesus said that he didn't come to bring peace, but he came to bring the sword, which is always pretty screwy to think when Jesus says something like that. But you really got to pay attention when he's throwing out these paradoxes and throwing out these zingers. And he said, you know, the sword is going to be felt most strongly in your own household. It's going to be between you and your parents and you and your children, you know, that you're going to feel this division of the sword. And of course, the word he uses for peace there, Sinah, is not the same as shalom, which means the greatest amount of health and wealth and connection. Sinah means calm and tranquility. So what is Jesus really saying here? He's saying, be advised, you know, here's the big caveat. Just know that if you're going to walk down this path with me, if you're really going to make all these changes, which is going to change the shape of your bell curve, society and your own family are not going to like it. They're going to push back on you. And so this is what we're up against here. We shape our lives in what is most acceptable to everyone around us so that we can fit in, so that we can be advanced, so that we can be liked and all these sorts of things. But you change that a little bit and it's going to change your relationship with people around you. So it's just more bits to think about as we start to look at the shadow and how it works in our lives. Comments, questions?
We call that homeostasis in psychological, that each family has a homeostasis. And when one tries to change, it destabilizes everybody there. And so if the person is able to maintain, hopefully they could bring the level of homeostasis up, you know, as everybody gets treatment or gets more healthier. But if not, it's more difficult to maintain the changes that you're trying to make in the family system.
That's great. That's a perfect way of looking at it. Absolutely. And now we have an actual word for it. Homeostasis. Any other thoughts? Anyone else experienced anything like that?
Well, a couple different ways. I mean, even like with Cynthia, when my wife, when she was asking me, like, at one point, you're going to 3 Bible studies in a week? Isn't that excessive? And I said to her, I said, well, I go, if I was going to have a vice, I guess this would probably be one of the more healthier ones, where you're just basically talking to God and talking to God through friends and and church family. So I said, personally, yeah, this is working for me, and it's making me a healthier person. So it was funny because, I mean, her not coming from church, and then her not really liking group speaks. She doesn't like to be with a group, and she's really very private in her thoughts, and doesn't like to share. So I mean, I can understand where for her, she's like, where's the old Frank that just didn't go to church every week? Where's the old Frank? It's like, well, I always gone to church, or I've always did something, but yeah, now I'm going to church 4 days a week instead of maybe 2. But what's 2 extra days when you're getting healthier and better? And I go, and so, yeah, I go, hey, if I feel I need to add another 2 or 3, I'll do it, whatever. So that was one thought. And then when you were talking about the shadow, even good things. And I noticed, like, sometimes with me, I traveling obviously is part of my life. And I've gone to some really wonderful and exciting places. But because I know not everybody has had the same experiences that I have been to the Great Wall of China, been to Bali, or wherever these places are, I tend not to talk about them, because not that I'm not proud, or not that I'm not excited that I've been there, but because I don't want to hurt somebody else's feelings that maybe possibly have wanted to travel to those locations and never been able to. So I tend to find myself pushing that down. And unless I'm either asked, or unless I know somebody has traveled too, then maybe I bring it up, or then I might talk about it. But a lot of time I try not to really, upplay it. I try to downplay it or not mention it at all. So I think that would be a shadow, that even though it's a good thing, there's nothing bad about travel, but I push it down at not wanting to sound braggadocious, or not wanting to sound like, I'm so full of myself.
I've got one too. I come from a blue collar, hardworking family in the Midwest, and although several of the kids in my cousin group have gone to college, I'm the first one that got a PhD, and my parents didn't go to college. They both graduated from high school, and that was it. And I always downplay it, so much so that when after 7 years of graduate school, when I finally, graduated and defended my dissertation, I didn't invite them, because I knew it would just be too hard for them, that they would feel uncomfortable, that they don't really understand it, that I'm always downplaying it with my family, because I don't want anyone to feel uncomfortable, and I don't want to be viewed as superior in some way, because I don't see myself that way. But it also, I realize in looking back, that was a huge loss for me, because I had no one when I was there, when I was defending my research, and I won some awards, and there was nobody there. So there's a price to pay when you put those parts of oneself away. Mm-hmm. And that hasn't changed much, I have to say. I'm still like that with my family. Just
Wow.
put it away.
Wow. Yeah. The price to
Well, thank you for sharing that with us.
Oh, thanks for hearing it.
Yeah, and Frank, thank you for reminding me. I've never been to the Great Wall of China, man.
Yeah,
Ouch.
it's awesome.
Oh, it's so funny. Just real quick, I digress. I go there with my brother, and so we get there, and we get to the top. We're standing on the wall, and I kid you not, within 3 minutes, my brother looks around and goes, "Okay, I get it. Let's go." I'm like, "What? I mean, do you not realize where you're at? I mean, David, come on." People around the world would love to be at this spot where you're standing, and you just give me 3 minutes and yeah, I get it. Let's go.
It's all about the traveling companions, isn't it?
Oh yeah,
Gotta have
I
the
hate
right
traveling
folks.
with my brother. I hate.
Oh man. Well,
Dave,
yeah.
building on what Frank and Becky said, this probably won't correlate, but in my brain it does. And I know I'm being redundant, but when I was on the other side, when I asked what I needed to learn to come back, what I was supposed to learn, it was to learn to embrace the shadow side, to bring out the individual and to embrace that rather than hiding it, I don't know if that makes any sense. What I was told was, you've given your whole life for everyone else, you're to learn to do you.
Okay. That makes perfect sense. Mm-hmm.
Do you think, the homeostasis thing, part of when we're embracing this part of ourselves that we put away because we needed to fit into our family of origin or our friends, or, like the gentleman was saying about his girlfriend. Do you think that maybe it's because they're experiencing loss, or that you're kind of pulling away from them because you're becoming this other, not familiar, you're creating these changes in yourself and you're stepping out to embrace these things that are not the norm within your family or your friends or whoever in your past, and that, maybe they fight that, there's the pushback because that separates you from them. I mean, I think when we're going through change, I can definitely feel the separation, but it's like a necessary change for me. But sometimes I wonder if it bewilders my parents, and they feel a sense of loss of the kind of connectivity we had.
I think that can be there, but in my case, because connection is so important to me, I am really good at being the chameleon and fitting in to whatever it is my family feels comfortable with. To the point of, like, I went into business first because my dad was a businessman and that would be a way we could communicate. And I learned football because that's big in my family, and that's not my normal thrust. And so I think that can be true, Sharon, but in my case, I think my family's proud of me. I just don't think they understand it. And they're not really interested. It's not what interests them. And so that's okay, because, I've got my sweet husband and I've made a life for myself, but I just, in talking about the shadow, I'd never thought of it as the positive things we put away, but that was a biggie for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there is another aspect to this too. I mean, the person who is making changes is making unwelcome reminders of the changes that are not being made in the other folks around them. They're even if that person is not giving unsolicited advice or preaching, just the fact that they see the changes being made is reminding them that they haven't been answering calls in their own journeys. And that is not usually handled very well. And so, you've got that whole aspect to it. So it's really complex. I mean, Becky's talking about one instance, Sharon is talking about another, which is really true. When someone starts changing, you do feel that you're starting to move in opposite directions, and it just feels like a loss of closeness. You know, I think Marion and I went through that as I was going through the first things. I always tell this, you know, kind of humorously, that there were books that I'd bring home that she wouldn't let me keep in the house. They had to be put out in the garage at night. But that's just, it's just, you know, was an expression of that starting to feel estranged. And the other thing is, how far is this going to go? You know, maybe it's okay right now, but I mean, is this trajectory going to keep on going? Are we going to have anything to talk about? Are we going to be able to sit in the same room together at some point? So it's a lot of fear.
Dave, in defense of my insanity, I had no religion or spirituality in my life when you and I got together, and I was thrust into fundamental Christianity, legalism and all. And being a single mom, and having gone through a lot, I so wanted to belong to that church and those people. I wanted to be a part of something. And so I embraced it with everything in me. And to my detriment, I'm still scarred by it. But yeah, when you brought some of those books were a little bit out there. I mean, I was in my box, but they were way out there. And I wasn't ready.
Well,
some of them I'm still not ready for.
Okay, I got a bombshell to throw in.
Okay.
Gender. So just think about our shadow in relationship to gender, and what we as men put away and what we as women put away. It's huge.
Yeah. And now all that's changing with gender identity, isn't it?
Mhm.
I mean, it's like all of that is crossing and morphing and changing sides, and you know, all of us are being asked to understand this and move with this, and it's difficult stuff. It's really hard to do.
Mhm.
So absolutely, another great point. You know?
Here's another question for you, or bomb to throw in there, or grenade. When Sharon was talking about, you know, when we are changing, that, you know, sometimes, you know, people kind of say, you know, they're kind of freaked out, you know, by too much change too quick. Well, I know it's probably being hypocritical, you know, and here's where I'm not going to be a shadow with you all. No, I have a couple friends. Sometimes we can be pretty piggy. I mean, let's just put it this way. I wouldn't want to be tape recorded and have anybody in this group listen to some of my conversations with a couple of my friends. I mean, one or two, I may feel like having to take a scalding hot shower after we talk, because it's like, wow, that conversation was really kind of, and I guess why I'm saying that is to show my warts, but also I try to find a balance, and I wonder if it's good to do that, where I still try to maintain who I used to be as I'm changing. So I'm not trying to like do a complete 180. I'm still sometimes Piggy Frank, you know, with my friend Randy and a couple others. Now there's some that I have pushed away altogether, saying, okay, no, I can't, I just don't want to go there, don't want to go down that road. But I still see value in some of my friends. And even though I know sometimes we're going to go dark and piggish, I still say, well, God, there's still some value there. So I'm willing to go with you guys a little bit in the journey of pigdom. But then at some point I stop. I say, okay, time to cut the conversation. You know, I need to take a hot shower. Talk to you later. Bye. But what do you all feel about that? I mean, do you think it's good to just do 180 and that's being true? Or am I being more true and not hiding the shadow by saying, no, you know, I still, you know, they still have that in me right now. And so it's okay to play with it a little bit as long as I don't cross the line in my brain. Maybe somebody else's brain would be, I did cross the line, but in my brain, I'm like, okay, I don't think I crossed the line here. I'm okay with this. But once I feel when I feel like, no, I crossed the line, I went past the threshold, then it's like, gotta go, stop, goodbye, talk to you later. And then I go in my prayer closet and pray for repentance. So what do we feel about that? Is it okay to kind of go at this slower with certain people? You know, some people I've cut off, some people I don't, but there's those few people that I still care about, and I'm not ready to do 180 on them yet. And so I kind of play with it a little bit and kind of go on that journey a little bit. I hope I'm explaining it right.
I think you are. And don't we all do that anyway? I mean, we walk into our place of business and we're going to be acting one way. We walk into a group of one friends, we're acting another way. We go into a church, we go into a different group of friends. I mean, Becky was talking about being a chameleon, but we all do that to a certain extent. And we're fitting in with the culture of that particular group. And that's needed, that's necessary. Now, yes, if you're not being true anymore to the values that you are starting to learn or change into, that's something that you need to take a look at. But to do as the Romans do, to fit into the group in which you're a part of, I think that's part of the code shifting that we all need to do as we move through our lives.
Okay, cool. But just be mindful. Know what you're. Be aware. Yeah.
Yeah, be aware. And if the behavior that you're engaging in, because everybody else does in this particular group, is really starting to bump up against the values and the new sensibilities that you're growing into, well, then you do need to take a look at that and make sure that you are acting with integrity. You know? Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, like I went to a party the other, we went to, it was a couple of Sundays ago, the Kentucky Derby party. Now, normally I'd party and drink up a storm with everybody else and get a little, schnockered. But, it's like, nah, I just kind of like, no, I can have a drink or two. I'm not a prude, but at the same time, no need to get drunk, no need to be stupid. And so I just kept my wits about me, but, I did have a drink or two. So that's where I'm saying I kind of still try to play in that arena as long as I still feel there's value with those people and that friendship. But if I ever feel like there's a part where, no, I can't control myself anymore, or no, they're not healthy for me, then I have no problem walking away. Because ultimately, I do want to do what's best for me, my family, and like I said, right now, this path I'm on, I feel is what's best for me and my family.
There you go. Absolutely. All right.
I wanted to add something
Go ahead.
on the gender topic that Becky brought up, and my internet connection is going in and out, so I'm getting frustrated with it. So if you lose me, so be it. But I think for me, kind of coming of age when I was in my marriage and having kids. I mean, I think the model that I was trained in was that as a woman, I'm supposed to take care of everybody, kids, my husband, all of that stuff. And I was having a job at the same time, a pretty demanding job. And I think at some point I realized that I was burning out. And I was starting to get angry with everyone and feeling like a victim, because I was so over-functioning and trying to do it all, that I finally realized that I was contributing to the situation in not so healthy ways. So I was starting to kind of do some self-examination, reading a lot of things about how do I, for my kid getting older, on more responsibility, for my husband also, and ask more of him. And when I started kind of getting a grip on what that looked like and changing my behavior, it wasn't a pretty picture.
Well, we lost you, Judy, but I think we get the drift of what you're trying to say, and that's important stuff. And notice how this fits into what Johnson is talking about here. When the shadow stays repressed and we don't allow it to play out in any way, it's going to come out sideways. So in that non-pretty reaction that Judy had to trying to put away so much of who she was in favor of what she thought she was supposed to be. And it comes out sideways. Even if she doesn't act on it, there's that anger, there's that resentment. Becky's talking about the things that she had to put away with her family. I don't know if it caused depression or sadness or whatever it caused in her, but it caused a reaction. Now she's saying, no, it didn't.
It didn't. It didn't, because the reward was a connection. So there was a reward to it. And I have other people that I can share that with. So that's the other piece of this. It's not black and white.
It isn't. And that's the thing. So we need to see how it's playing out in our lives, which is the important thing. To take this, not as a hard and fast rule of anything, just like the Enneagram, it's a tool that we use, but it is a way of seeing, maybe a template that you can lay down and just see how it lines up with the edges of your life and use it to be able to navigate yourself. Because what we're trying to do here is to define what the shadow is in our life so that we can find regular and ritual ways to pay it out, to give it vent, but in positive ways that obviously are going to allow us to acknowledge and embrace our whole selves, but not in ways that break the cultural bonds that we have with all the various groups in which we're a part. And that's the key. So identifying this in ways. And so every story that we've heard is a way of trying to identify what got repressed, why did it get repressed, and for how long, and what did that do, and what was the reaction. These are important things for us to be considering as we move through. And this idea that it's not only the negative stuff, it's the positive stuff. And look at this next sentence. Frank, just read one more sentence. Sorry, Manny, you're not getting much airtime tonight, but go for it. Just the next sentence.
Curiously, people resist the noble aspects of their shadow more strenuously than they hide the dark sides.
Isn't that a fascinating comment? We're going to be much more strenuous about the noble aspects of our shadow. We're going to resist those more than we hide the dark side. What in the world do you think is going on there? If that statement is true, can you think of a reason why it's true? Why would we resist these noble aspects that we've stuck down into the shadow even more than we're resisting the negative aspects that are down in the shadow? Can you think of a reason?
We feel less than, maybe how we were brought up.
No, these are the noble aspects, Frank.
No, I understand. But if you feel that you're not worthy to have those noble.
Oh, okay.
I mean, if you look at a lot of the celebrities. I mean, they're really great with all their altruistic causes that they want to be part of and so on and so forth. And I think part of it is of a guilt that they live a life that nobody else has, and they feel, gee, maybe I don't deserve it. So I could see where somebody could feel like, well, maybe I don't deserve this. So they downplay it, push it away.
So we've bought the line that we are just this much, just that part that's within the bell curve. And it's hard for us to imagine that we have these nobler traits. Okay.
Yeah.
I think about people who grow up and into a career because it is what is expected of them, a lawyer or being a doctor, and then they come to some realization later on, perhaps in midlife, that this is not me. I don't like work, the best in me.
Mm-hmm.
And they really wanted to be a musician all their life, or something that's pulling on a completely different aspect of their gifts and abilities that they squashed because
Judy,
of the
why would they resist that, Judy, do you think? If that's,
there's a penalty to pay in their family.
There you go.
A huge penalty to pay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a good.
But I think going back to what Frank was just saying earlier, there is I forgot who said, I think it might have been Nelson Mandela's inauguration address, where he said something along the lines of, we're not afraid. He said something along the lines that we're afraid of our greatness. I forgot exactly how he worded it. It was beautiful. But the idea is that we have to get out of our comfort zone if we're going to embrace our greatness. And a lot of us are just afraid of, you know, getting up on stage and being in the spotlight just for that reason alone. Even independent of what our families might think.
Mm-hmm. So William, why do you think we're afraid of our greatness?
Ooh, I I can only speak for myself on that. I think there is some of this has to do with my type 9-ness on the Enneagram. But it's kind of like not feeling worthy on some level, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it had, for me anyways, it has to do with that worthiness, whatever. I'm not exactly sure what the hell that means, but I know there's something there going on for me.
Okay. Anyone else? If we are really afraid of our greatness, why would we be afraid? Anyone else?
Maybe we're afraid we can't live up to it.
Okay.
Yeah, we can't sustain it.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
You're a failure.
Okay.
You're a failure.
Oh,
Yeah.
one of the
Or
voices
striving
in
for
my head.
Doug, what were you going to say, Doug?
Well, it was sort of like, I was thinking along the same lines on the, that William was talking about as being a 9. And you really want that connection with others. You want to keep the peace. And you want to be like with everybody. And you're scared if you bring up some strength, you may alienate them. You may break that connection because you want connection, you want peace, you want harmony, and you don't want to disrupt that all. And I also see that in politics lately. You know, I'm with the left, you know, the liberal side, I'm connecting with them, and then I'm with the right side, I'm connecting with them, and then I feel like you know, whoa, who am I? You know, because I'm just connecting and I'm not really sure where it all puts together because of the connection part.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Vaughn just sent me that quote from Nelson Mandela, actually.
Read it for us, would you?
It says, our deepest fear is not that we are weak. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? You are a child of God. Your playing small does not serve the world. As we are liberated from our own fear, our presence automatically liberates others.
I just sent you that clip. There was a clip from the movie Coach Carter, Dave. I sent you that clip, and it says basically that. I knew I heard that before.
Well, that's about as articulate as it gets. What William just read in terms of trying to put a finger on this. I remember Thomas Merton in Conjectures of a Guilty Bystander. Jim Golden was just saying he started reading that. But after he's walking away from 4th and Walnut and he has this huge revelation, he asks this question. He says, how can you tell people, how can you convince people that they're all walking around shining like the sun? I mean, that's the way he saw them in that moment. Every one of them with this light inside of them. And he says, how can you tell people they're all walking around shining like the sun? How can we convince ourselves that we've got this light in us, this greatness in us? And yes, I think we do more strenuously resist that because of the great responsibility maybe that it entails and all the reasons that we just gave and how much it may force us to do things that are going to disrupt our world. How many people have resisted maybe becoming Christian because how much were they going to have to give up? You know, there's all these thoughts that I can't be myself anymore. I can't indulge myself anymore. Who knows what the thought process is, but it's there. The resistance is definitely there. And I think that Johnson is going to bring that out. Go ahead and continue reading for a while, Frank, and let's see if we can have Johnson tell us more about his thoughts.
Okay. Curiously, people resist the noble aspects of their shadow more strenuously than they hide their dark sides. To draw the skeletons out of the closet is relatively easy, but to own the gold in the shadow is terrifying. It is more disrupting to find that you have a profound nobility of character than to find out you are a bum.
There's one.
Of course, you are both, but one does not discover these two elements at the same time. The gold is related to our higher calling, and this can be hard to accept at certain stages of life. Ignoring the gold can be as damaging as ignoring the dark side of the psyche, and some people may suffer a severe shock or illness before they learn how to let the gold out.
Hold on a second there. Think about some of these folks that have had profound losses. And the ones I'm thinking about especially is when they've lost a child. Maybe the child was abducted and or killed or whatever. And then you see these people starting crusades and starting nonprofit organizations and working, you know, in a macro area for this cause to try to bring this out. Jody Barber is someone who lost her son to drug overdose, and she's someone now who has, you know, become an activist. Vernon Porter, our bass player, lost his daughter to a drug overdose, and he was one of the ones who was primarily responsible, or one of the ones responsible for getting the Good Samaritan law passed in the state of California. He actually went to DC and testified before a Senate subcommittee. I mean, you know, obviously he was great as a bass player, but here's another whole aspect coming out because of the trauma and the tragedy that brought a certain other portion of his psyche to bear. And so I think there's a lot of truth in this. You know, there's that idea of the anti-hero in movies that we see all the time. And more movies are coming out this way, it seems, where a person really doesn't know who they are. And suddenly they find out that they're this, you know, they're the one. The Matrix and Neo, he's the one, you know, and I remember that one scene where he's talking to someone else in the ship, and he says, well, what did he tell you? Did he tell you you're the one? He goes, yeah. He goes, what a mind job. What do you say? What do you say to that? You're the one. You know, I think we say that to ourselves when certain parts of the gold of our persona starts to be brought out of the shadow, and it's just like, what do you say to that? You know, what is that going to entail? What's that? What journey do I have to take now? What do I have to give up? I think there's all those parts of it psychologically that are creating this resistance, even to the gold that's down there in the shadow. Go ahead and read a little bit more, Frank.
Indeed, this kind of intense experience may be necessary to show us that an important part of us is lying dormant or unused. In tribal cultures, shamans or healers often experience an illness that gives them the insight they need to heal themselves and then bring wisdom to their people. This is often the case for us today. We are still operating with the archetype of the wounded healer who has learned to cure himself and find the gold in his experience.
Okay, this is the point at which I want to share my screen. And I always find it interesting when other things that are crossing my desk and my email box are lining up with the things that we're talking about in here. And it just kind of reinforces that. And last week, Richard Rohr's weekly meditations had something that I think is something we can read right now and see how.
The Wounded Healer.
The Wounded Healer, yes. Can you see that on your screens? Okay. So let me just move through this and let's see how it lines up. Ministry can indeed be a witness to the living truth that the wound, which causes us to suffer now, will be revealed to us later as the place where God intimated God's new creation. And that's Henry Nouwen, one of my favorite authors. Christianity, in its mature forms, keeps pushing us toward the necessary tragic, the foolishness of the cross, as Paul calls it. Normally, the way God pushes us is by disillusioning us with the present mode. Until the present falls apart, we will never look for something more. We will never discover what it is that really sustains us. That dreaded falling apart experience is always suffering in some form. All of us hate suffering, yet all religions talk about it as necessary. It seems to be the price we pay for the death of the small self and the emergence of the true self, when we finally come to terms with our true identity in God. Many Jungians describe this in psychological terms as the necessary soul suffering that comes from the death of the ego. Jesus would say, unless the grain of wheat dies, it remains just a grain of wheat. By avoiding this legitimate pain of being human, we sadly bring on ourselves much longer lasting and often fruitless pain. In the work I've done with men's spirituality, we call that suffering in its transformed state the sacred wound. The sacred wound is a concept drawn from classical mythology, but also from the Christ story. In mythology, the would-be hero is always wounded. The word innocent, innocens in Latin, not yet wounded, is not a complimentary term in mythology. The puer is the young boy, puella for the young girl, who refuses to be wounded. More precisely, he refuses to recognize and suffer the wounds that are already there. He's just going to remain nice and normal so everybody will accept him. In our culture, he might smugly remain white and middle class, healthy, sinless, Catholic, good looking, and happy. Maybe he will drive a fancy car or wear the latest clothing. He refuses to let things fall apart. He refuses to be wounded, much less to allow the humiliating wound to become sacred and sanctifying. Yet I personally believe that the Gospels are saying there is no other way to know something essential. Allowing our always unjust wounds to, in fact, become sacred wounds is the unique Christian name for salvation. Pretty cool definition of salvation, don't you think? Mm-hmm. Always allowing our always unjust wounds to, in fact, become sacred wounds is the unique Christian name for salvation. We always learn our mystery at the price of our innocence. That's so interesting and so real. And it forces us to look at the Eden story in a whole different way if we're really going to take this to heart. You know, up in there, more precisely, this puer, this puella, this innocence refuses to recognize and suffer the wounds that are already there. He's just going to remain nice and normal so everybody will accept him. This is exactly what we're talking about in terms of what culture relegates us to put into the shadow so that we can be just that. Last paragraph. We must trust the pain and not get rid of it until we've learned its lessons. The suffering can be seen as a part of the great pattern of how God is transforming all things. If there is one consistent and clear revelation in the Bible, it is that God, the God of Israel, is the one who turns death into life. When we can trust the transformative pattern and that God is in the suffering, our wounds become sacred wounds. The actual and ordinary life journey becomes itself the godly journey. We trust God to be in all things, even in sin and suffering. Now, obviously, he's not strictly talking about the shadow there, but there's so much overlap, and there's so much that we can learn from that. I sent this to you a couple hours before we started, so it's in your inbox if you want to read it over again and kind of reflect a little bit more. Where are we at? Any thoughts about that? All right, let's let Frank read a little more. Got to earn his dough.
Wherever we start and whatever culture we spring from, we will arrive at adulthood with a clearly defined ego and shadow, a system of right and wrong, a teeter-totter with two sides.
And go ahead and go down and read the footnote there, buddy.
Ego and right are thought to be synonymous in all cultures, while shadow and wrong are also to be paired. There is great cultural strength in knowing exactly what is right and what is wrong, and to ally oneself appropriately. This is cultural rightness, highly effective, but very clumsy. When the Inquisition of the Middle Ages judged someone and often condemned him or her to be burned at the stake, there had to be an unquestioned basis for such a decision. The fact that individuality and the freedom of belief was evolving in the Western psyche added fuel to this one-sided attitude. Fanaticism always indicates unconscious uncertainty, not yet registering in consciousness.
That last line is so
Ooh,
huge. So
wow.
if you let it register, it is going to explain so much about the behavior we see, especially in religious circles. Fanaticism always indicates unconscious uncertainty, not yet registering in consciousness. It's down there, and they're papering it over and they're pounding it down. You know, the example that he uses here from the Middle Ages and the Inquisition. It's interesting, that was happening at the same time that the Enlightenment was starting to take hold, and people were thinking for themselves, and scientists were coming up with ideas that challenged the narrative of the church in terms of creation and physics and the world at large. And all of this is bumping up against each other. And it was just such a tumultuous time because of all that. And the church trying to clamp down harder and harder to stem the tide that couldn't be stemmed. I mean, basically they're pushing the ocean back with a broom, but they tried, and they tried with brutality in order to do that. You know, and so when you think of the fundamental sects and religious sects, or it can be anything, political sects, but the more fundamental they are, you know, they're playing at certainty. Thomas Merton had this great image of someone playing at contemplation, making contemplative faces in the mirror, you know, trying to pretend that they were being contemplative. Well, this is playing at certainty, making certain faces in the mirror, and trying to be certain when down deep we know that certainty doesn't exist. But these ideas of right and wrong that culture pounds into us, that the church pounds into us, we cling to those because we're trying so hard. Just like Marian said, she just wanted to fit in. She wanted to be a part of the group so badly that she was just, you know, keep everything else. It's almost like a kid sticking fingers in the air and going, la, 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 you know, we just want it to be certain. I remember counseling a young woman who was having just horrendous time at home with a drug addicted husband. And she knew deep down what she needed to do to protect the children, to protect herself with what was going on in the house. But she was struggling mightily with what the church told her her role was as a Christian wife. And she kept saying things like, would it be right if I did this? Would it be wrong of me to do that? And she was just being tormented because she knew the answers deep down, but she couldn't come to grips, and she didn't feel she had permission. And I remember at one point in the session, I just told her, maybe stop thinking in terms of right and wrong, and start thinking in terms of what is going to work or not work to preserve what's left of your family and to protect your children and yourself. But we have been so pounded with this idea of right and wrong, and we want to fit in because it feels like our survival to us, that we really can get at odds with these things. And I think it's up to us as a community to be able to disentangle all of that for each other and give each other permission to even just use our common sense to be able to make the choices that we need to make and know we need to make when things really get crazy, and even before they do. Maybe if we could do that before they got that crazy, they wouldn't get that crazy, right? Not much to say about that, huh?
Wow. Yeah.
Let's finish the paragraph, and then maybe we'll have a few things to wrap up with.
The religious process consists of restoring the wholeness of the personality. The word religion means to re-relate, to put back together again, to heal the wounds of separation. It is absolutely necessary to engage in the cultural process to redeem ourselves from our animal state. It is equally necessary to accomplish the spiritual task of putting our fractured, alienated world back together again. One must break away from the Garden of Eden, but one must also restore the heavenly Jerusalem.
Go ahead and finish the chapter.
Okay. Thus, it's clear that we must make a shadow, or there would be no culture. Then we must restore the wholeness of the personality that was lost in the cultural ideals, or we will live in a state of dividedness that grows more and more painful throughout our evolution. Generally, the first half of life is devoted to the cultural process, gaining one's skills, raising a family, disciplining oneself in 100 different ways. The second half of life is devoted to restoring the wholeness, making holy of life. One might complain that this is a senseless round trip, except that the wholeness at the end is conscious, while it was unconscious and childlike at the beginning. This evolution, though it seems gratuitous, is worth all the pain and suffering that it costs. The only disaster would be getting lost halfway through the process and not finding our completion. Unfortunately, many Westerners are caught in just this difficult place.
Yeah. Truer words were never spoke. We talk about the 4 stages of spiritual growth. We've talked about that in here. You know, the first stage, identifying with the egoic mind, with the self. The second stage, identifying with the group and the group think. And then getting kicked out of stage 2 and ending up in stage 3, which is the place of disorientation and loss of specific identity. And that's where a lot of us do get stuck. We get stuck right at that point. Because the dilemma is, do we try to go back into the cultural norm of stage 2? Do we go all the way back to stage 1, where we at least had some sense of way through? Or do we stay and sit in that place of disturbance until we can move on to a stage 4, where the identity is universal with everyone? It's a hard place to be, and so many of us find ourselves there. I likened it to camping outside the gates of Eden. You know, we're kicked outside the garden, we can't go back, but we're too afraid to go forward, and so we end up just camped outside the gates and stuck there. And Joseph Campbell talks about that in terms of not answering the call of the hero's journey, and you're just stuck in this little eddy off the main current, and it's this gray and sort of featureless existence that takes place at that point. Obviously, he's talking about the 2 halves of life, you know, the first half and the second half, getting stuck between the 2, afraid to go forward into the interior journey, but, you know, realizing that the external search for truth is not going to yield what you really want out of life. There's so many rich symbols and images here. So,
you know what's interesting, Dave?
Yeah.
I was thinking where it says one might complain with this senseless round trip. And I was thinking, I guess that's so great that we're human, that we get to actually ponder that and think, you know, why is it this way? Because I doubt the caterpillar that goes through its metamorphosis is, you know, saying to itself, why am I having to go through all this agony and pain to become a butterfly? You know, and, you know, when I start thinking about that, it's like, it is so great how God has created us, because we do get to ponder these things. We do get, I mean, we really get to choose, how do we see this? Do we want to take this down a road that brings us heartache and pain and agony? Or do we want to see this in a good light? I mean, we get that choice, you know? And so it's, I don't know, I just found that sentence hit me.
A lot of different ways to layer this up, obviously.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's as far as we want to go tonight. We covered some ground. We did good. I think we got like through 3 pages or something. Not bad.
I think it's a record.
Could be. Could be. Any last minute thoughts, comments? I think we're all played out. All right. All right, Frank, you're back on, buddy. Why don't you close us in prayer, and we'll part for a few days.
All right. Father, thank you for this evening. Thank you for truth wherever we find it. Help us to see how it applies. Help us to see how to live it. Help us to see how it draws us closer to you, and help us to use it to get closer to you. Thank you for all you've done for us. Thank you for the life you've given us. And thank you for the week in front of us. And we love you and pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Yeah. All right, everyone. Thanks. Sunday morning, I guess. Yeah, this is already Wednesday, isn't it? So Sunday morning, And now I need to remember to turn off the recording. So
Bye, everybody.
bye, everyone.
Bye.
Frank.
Great discussion.
Bye, JD.
Bye-bye.